Told down the phone that you're absolutely right, the story is true. He's recently had to go into hospital to have various checks, and I was even read out the medical terminology for all these checks.
Did you think it was legal?
I certainly thought it was wrong.
When they contacted him, Alex Ferguson apparently blew his top. The story never appeared, and he's still on top of his game. The News of the World used private detectives and illegal methods against anyone, even royalty. They hacked into the phone messages of Prince William and quoted them word for word. For a brief moment in 2007, the culture of criminality was exposed. Private detective Glenn Mulcaire and the News of the World's royal correspondent Clive Goodman were jailed and disgraced. News International insisted Goodman was a rogue reporter and that it went no wider.
A blind man in a very dark room can see that the official version of events doesn't make sense.
Nick Davis and the Guardian newspaper believed there was a cover-up from the start. Mulcaire had pleaded guilty to hacking into 5 non-royals' phones too. Who'd ordered him to do that? And how many other names were in his notebooks?
There you have a private investigator working full-time for the News of the World, but apparently hacking people's voicemail for, what, for a hobby? Just because he had time on his hands? This bloke was working 80 hours a week for the News of the World. Of course he was doing it for the newspaper. And what was so sickening about that official version of events was not just that News International chose to lie to all of us about it, but that the police allowed them to get away with that lie.
Andy Coulson, the News of the World's editor, resigned, but denied that he had any knowledge of phone hacking.
So what are we going to do to solve that?
Within a few months, he was hired by David Cameron and went with him to number 10. Critics say this was a huge political misjudgment.
I find it quite extraordinary that David Cameron, despite all the informal, off-the-record advice that he must have been given by all and sundry, went ahead and made that appointment.
But there was a small group of people who had no fear of News International. A Manchester solicitor called Mark Lewis set the ball rolling. It happened that one of the non-royals whose phones had been hacked into was already a client of his, Gordon Taylor, of the Professional Footballers Association.
It was at that point that I had a conversation with one of the detectives, but he told me there were something like 6,000 victims, that he would give me enough to hang them, and that I didn't need everything. He would just give me the papers on Gordon Taylor, and the papers were sufficient to succeed and to obtain a settlement on behalf of Gordon Taylor.
We now know that to settle the case before it reached open court, the News of the World paid out around £700,000, hundreds of thousands more than Gordon Taylor would otherwise have won. But at the time, this confidential settlement ensured that no one learned any more about who had ordered the phone hacking to take place.
And the payment had been signed off from the very top.
There was a particular settlement that I authorized, and I've said was made with information that was incomplete. I acted on the advice of executives and lawyers with incomplete investigation, and that's a matter of real regret for me personally.
Tomorrow, MPs will want to ask, was James Murdoch involved in a cover-up? By quietly settling the first civil cases, News International appear to have kept many of the facts about phone hacking out of public view. It was at this point that Nick Davis from The Guardian broke the story open.
The story we eventually published in July 2009 quoted sources in the police who had had access to the material that had been collected by that first inquiry. And they were saying there wasn't just 8 victims, as named in court, there were, quote, thousands. 48 hours after we published our first story, News International put out a statement accusing us of lying to the British people. What I'm about to give you is copies of an email.
Nick Davis appeared before a Commons committee and produced new documentary evidence for them. But News International still seemed to survive unscathed.
News International's strategy has been simple. They deny everything unless they